Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking and Presentations, Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I have now placed in the chat room. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please write in the chat room or turn on your microphone, say hi, and I'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Reverend Jay MacLeod, a sociologist and Anglican priest. Also joining us tonight is Johanna Myers, Associate Director of Messy Church USA. Jay, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Jay, so tell us a little bit about how you got into sociology and then the Anglican priesthood. It seems like maybe they don't have a lot in common, but that might not be the case.
Right. No, so I mean, I grew up in a secular household, and I got into sociology by accident. When I was at university in Boston, I was doing a lot of community work and ended up working intensively for 4 summers in a particular low-income housing development. And when it came time to write my thesis, my discipline was actually social studies, which was interdisciplinary social theory, history, and sociology. Instead of spending a lot of time in the library, I wrote it on not the kids that I'd been working with, who were, between the ages of 12 and 14, but rather their older brothers. And there were 2 quite colorful, Black, one almost entirely white. And by the time I was writing my thesis, everyone in the neighborhood knew me and trusted me. So the thesis went well. It ended up getting published as a sociology textbook and turned into a kind of bestseller by sociology standards. So I got into sociology very much by accident.
And so tell us a little bit about then. Yeah, you said, so this, here's the book, Ain't No Making It. Tell us a little bit about what interested you there in hanging around all these low-income people and why that became such a passion of yours.
Well, one of the things that really struck me early on was how the aspirations of these kids didn't even cut across class lines. And in a society that's ostensibly open, where any child can grow up to be president, I was interested in exploring why that was. And I think the reason why professors liked it because students liked it, and students liked it because it was based on a lot of participant observation. And these guys were really colorful. And they also didn't follow the script. So it was the group of Black kids who kind of, applied themselves in school, were responsible. It was the white kids who had all been arrested, done time, were very disaffected. And so that was a kind of twist on most people's expectations.
Fantastic. And then lastly, before we move on to our next subject, so we think about the Anglican Church or the Episcopal Church or any church for that matter of being a whole bunch of people who really behave themselves. There are no outsiders seem not to be so a part of what's happening. They're really, respectable people. Tell us, how did you then get into the Anglican priesthood and then become a parish priest for the Episcopal Church?
Well, happily, I discovered that the church, the Episcopal Church, and all churches is a school for sinners. Really, there's no one perfect. Far from it. There, what happened was, it took actually me going to. I'd never been on an airplane and ended up in my junior year in college in a little village outside Kathmandu, Nepal, and I lived with a Tibetan refugee family. They were devout Buddhists, and it took that experience, living in a single room with this family for 3.5 months. You could not help but see the value of religion, prayer, spirituality, the interior life. And when I came back home, that just made me much more open to religion. I got a grant then to study in England, And so I decided to study theology, just straight academic theology. Also fell in love. So my wife, Sally Asher, is British. And I've been in Britain for nearly 30 years. We had, right when we finished, we spent what was supposed to be a year doing community organizing work in rural Mississippi, and that quickly turned into 4 years. But then we went back to England. I actually trained for the ministry in theological college in Lincoln, served parishes mostly in the industrial north of England, and then the last one in Bedford, and then came home, as it were, 10 years ago to St. Andrew's Church. So we live in Wilmot, Wilmot Flat, just down the road from New London, New Hampshire, where the church is located, and happily just almost a stone's throw from where my elderly parents live. So yeah, it was a roundabout route to the priesthood.
Fantastic. Let's take a look now at the Episcopal Church and what it means. Okay. So Jay, tell us, so it looks like this is a very political oriented church. It's a church that's about getting into society, about yeah, people centered, obviously, like I'd imagine a church would be. But tell us tell us about the Episcopal Church, the Anglican faith. What is this all about?
So, I mean, I think that's a great point that you make. The Episcopal Church tends to be very engaged with its neighborhood, with its community. And that doesn't make it, unique, obviously, amongst churches. In the Church of England, where I was really formed, my job as the parish priest or pastor was not just to serve the, say, 150 people in church on a Sunday morning, but all 8,000 people, say, that lived in the parish. And because of my background in community work and community organizing, I love that. In my last parish, it was predominantly Muslim. They're mostly from the Indian subcontinent, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, and also longstanding Christians, including some Punjabi Christians. And so we did a lot of things together that served the wider neighborhood. And of course, those of us in the, in the Anglican Church, it's always been, good at that. It was kind of considers itself both Catholic and Reformed. It's a sort of middle way between Catholicism and Protestantism. And so, pushed would say, no, we are Protestant, but we still draw on a lot of our Catholic heritage.
Okay, and Jay, let's get into that a little bit. So you mentioned that you studied so-called just academic theology before, and we're talking about social issues that clearly you're very are close to heart. Now let's get to the stuff that divides us. This is the Confession of Faith, of course. So let's go to the first roundtable. What is the Anglican Church, and how is it different from other churches? As you said, it considers itself kind of it's Catholic, but it's also not. So, Jay, when we first spoke, you described the Anglican Church to me as a third way between Catholicism and Protestantism. It is, in fact, in other words, all of the above. Let's look at the definition on the official website of the Episcopal Church. Here's an overview of the faith. Quote, as Episcopalians, we believe in and follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, whose life, death, and resurrection saved the world. We believe that God loves you, no exceptions. The Episcopal Church embraces a legacy of inclusion, aspiring to tell and exemplify God's love for every human being. People of all genders and sexual orientations serve as bishops, priests, and deacons in our church. Lay people and clergy work together in leadership and government and governance. End quote. You are an Anglican priest, Jay, but you work for the Episcopal Church. Tell us about this very inclusive faith. How far does inclusion go before the Anglican Church stops and another faith begins?
Sure. So, I mean, that was a great definition. So we don't have in the Episcopal Church I use Anglican Church to encompass the entire worldwide Anglican communion, which includes the Church of England, the Church in South Africa, the Church of Wales. It's a kind of worldwide, and obviously is influenced because of the British Empire, right? So it's kind of rooted there. And, we don't have a distinctive confession of faith. What we just hear, we have the historic creeds of the church, the Nicene Creed, those historic faith, statement of faith, as well as, the Athanasian and the Apostles' Creed. So it's a very kind of big tent. And I thought that little description you read did a good job, because basically what distinguishes us is that we want to be followers of Jesus. So at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, our mission statement is, with St. Andrew and all our ancestors of faith, we are learning to follow Jesus in the way of love. And so anyone who would like to join in that, considers themselves a follower of Jesus, they're very, very welcome. And we have huge differences in theological beliefs. There's some people who are very comfortable with, a very strong confession of faith. Others would say, I'm agnostic about the virgin birth. I'm agnostic about what happens when we die. I'm agnostic about, for instance, something as central as the divinity of Jesus. There's others who would hold that those are very dear to them and very central. And so we welcome all. What unites us is that we see Jesus of Nazareth as a guide for us, someone in whose life ours can be rooted, who teaches us how to live and how to love.
Fantastic. And
We're,
excuse me.
no, I was just going to say, where it shades off into other faiths, of course, we work very closely with all people of goodwill, people of no faith, but also people of all of the worldwide faiths. And, that was part of what I found so joyful during my time in Bedford, was us working together, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Jews, Hindus, across those lines of faith, but to work for the common good of our neighborhood.
Fantastic. And just before we move on to our next roundtable, I want to ask you for a little bit of the, how do I say, the not so nice aspects of what's happening right now, because you say all that and that sounds great. And we think, oh, okay, I want to belong to that. But, as I remember seeing very clearly written in graffiti on a city wall, it said, no borders. But it seems that the first thing that happens once borders are erased is that they get drawn anew, because people need some kind of identity. They need some kind of belonging. And I'm saying this because I want to ask you, so why is it then that um, it seems like you and the church, the Episcopal Church, the Anglican faith are very middle of the road? Why is it that it doesn't seem to be such a political force, or in the political conversation today, all of the Western nations are having extreme problems with extremism? They don't seem to have that. People don't seem to be wanting to be a part of something that has everybody else. They seem to want to be part of something that where they have a distinct identity and borders from other people. How does the Episcopal Church and the Anglican faith fit in then in this political dynamic?
So, we want to have it both ways. So on the one hand, we want to say, as soon as you draw a line in the sand and say, between yourselves and others, what you can be sure of is Jesus is on the other side of that line, that he was so explicit about that. He was all about, creating community, reaching out to others, including those who were considered, beyond the pale, untouchable, as it were. At the same time, of course, we're an institution, and like all institutions, have our failures, far from perfect. I think, what you're describing is, of course, the Western culture has moved away from the church quite profoundly. But that is, something that's, we can't generalize over, because it's something that's happened in Europe, in parts of the Southern Hemisphere, and is increasingly happening in the United States. But, religion still is extraordinarily important and defines, to a large extent, people's identities and their lives in the Southern Hemisphere. And so, as Episcopalians, we want to say, we've got a distinct identity. Inclusion is very, very important to us. And, the Episcopal Church of New Hampshire, of course, was, created all sorts of waves in that worldwide Anglican communion when, Gene Robinson was consecrated as the first openly gay bishop who was in an active relationship. And, we thought that was important to do, because we think that is right. Now, that did not go over well with other members of the Anglican Communion, many of whom are working in a really different cultural situation, in Nigeria and other places. So the Worldwide Anglican Communion struggles with those tensions, and there's no easy way around that. What does unite us is that we're all seeking to follow Jesus in the way of love.
Fantastic. Sounds like something straight out of the letters of Paul, bringing everybody together who are all on different pages, living in completely different realities. Let's go on to our second roundtable, messy church. Okay, I'd like to bring in Johanna Myers, Associate Director of Messy Church USA. Hi, Johanna.
Hi.
So, Johanna, tell us a little bit about this fascinating organization. So, we think of a church as having a building, having a fixed congregation that's coming every week. Messy Church is none of that. Tell us about this fascinating organization.
Right. So it's interesting that we're kind of talking about the Anglican Church, because Messy Church got its start in the Church of England as a way of reaching families and folks that maybe had decided that church wasn't for them, or maybe they felt like they didn't fit into church. And so a group of folks kind of thought, how can we bring people together in a way that is safe and welcoming, and also creative, and make space for people to explore faith, and maybe they're not sure what they believe, or maybe they're young and they're still learning, who knows, but how can we kind of create that space for everyone? And so Messy Church got started and all the way back in 2004, and it took off, and it spread in England, and has spread in many countries across the world, including here in the US. And so I work for Messy Church USA part-time. I also lead a local Messy Church in my own church. But we here in the US, where Messy Church USA kind of works with messy churches from all over. We're in a variety of different denominations. It's not just Episcopalian or Methodist or whatever. It's kind of any denomination, and it's a model for being church and exploring faith together. And it's a lot of fun, which sometimes Sunday morning traditional church isn't, we don't think of it as being fun, but it's also a way for families to kind of grow and learn together as well.
Okay, and tell us a little bit, Johanna, going on. Tell us, what can people expect when they go to Messy Church? Let me just read. It says, Messy Church sees itself as a global movement and church, but not as you know it. At Messy Church, all ages meet together to learn about Christ through games, crafts, and activities, music, and storytelling from the Bible. A foundational ingredient of Messy Church is to gather around a table for a snack or a meal and build relationships with each other, God, and the world. So snack around the table, that doesn't sound that much different than the original idea of the communion. Tell us about what can people expect? What do people like the most?
Yeah. So at a typical Messy Church, and I will say Messy Church is different in every kind of context. It is very kind of community driven, but in every Messy Church, you're going to find some kind of welcome. You're going to find activities, crafts, or science, or prayer, all kinds of different activities around one particular Bible verse or Bible theme. And then a celebration time, a time of kind of bringing all of that together, storytelling, music, and that, and then a meal together to kind of build community. So in that sense, a lot of the same elements that you would find in a traditional church. We might have a little bit more glue and scissors and maybe even some glitter, things that you wouldn't find on Sunday morning, I guess. But yeah, so it's about building community, and it's about kind of using all of our senses to explore what it means to follow Jesus. Every messy church is different depending on their context, but we all ascribe to 5 kind of core values. We are about hospitality. We're about bringing all ages together. We're about celebrating God and one another. We're about creativity, and everything we do is kind of centered on Christ, is centered on the way of Jesus.
Wow. Okay. So let's bring Jay back in. Jay, why did you bring Messy Church to your church? As you we were talking, the theme that goes throughout this interview is that you do things kind of in a different way. You got into Christianity through a family of devout Buddhists, if I remember correctly. Tell us why Messy Church at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church?
Well, I had experience of messy church back in England, but when it comes to rural New England, again, it's the culture of the church and the wider culture have drifted apart, and so many people who you're meeting in schools and such like, it's not just the children, but the parents don't know the basic Christian story, and so we have to find new ways to engage them. And when I had responsibility as well for a little church in Newport, just down the road from us in New London, and there's an extremely gifted colleague called Erin Jenkin, and she began Messy Church there. We worked together on that, but she really drove it, and she just has an extraordinary kind of talent and way of storytelling. And so what we discovered is that, it's fantastic. It's its own congregation. I think it's important for churches to understand that, okay, we all want kids in our community, right? It's so important. New London is largely a retirement community, so we have to work hard to make that happen. But Messy Church isn't principally an on-ramp to conventional church, to Sunday morning. It usually becomes a community of its own. And so, we have Messy Church on the first Sunday of every month. And it's a very different experience of church. It's still worship, it's Christian worship, it's church, but not as you know it. So imagine people arriving, they come in, and instead of sitting still and listening to a series of Bible readings and a sermon, they're engaging at all these little tables or stations where they're learning about that given scripture passage, but by doing. So you see a picture there, that was on Palm Sunday, and those kids have just created the entryway into Jerusalem. And so that would be, one of the activities. So there's a whole series of activities, some craft-based, some more reflective, some games. We always try and have a game. We had a baptism last Sunday, our first messy baptism. And one of the things that was so much fun was a kind of sponge relay. And then when we go through into church for the celebration segment, so this is done in our parish hall, all the activities, and we don't rush it. People are so enjoying it, and they can graze as they'd like. They could go to one activity. If they really get into it, they could spend 20 minutes there. Others will go around to all the different activities. And then after around, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, we then go into church. And that's when the pastor or whoever the leader is tries to draw it all together in a kind of celebration. And we have Holy Communion every time. I think there's not many messy churches, but because of our kind of sacramental tradition and how important that is to us, we have an abbreviated form of Holy Communion every time. And then, but it feels very different than, communion on a Sunday morning. We have a very traditional 8 o'clock Sunday service. Our 10 o'clock service, excuse me, is more engaging. It's less wordy. There's more music. It's quite vibrant. But messy church is different again. It is fun. And so then afterwards, we also then gather for the meal afterwards, and that's crucial. It's, that's when the relationships are really solidified. People are just relaxing. talking to each other, whatever's on their hearts and minds. And so that's a great opportunity. It's I think it's a great model of being church. It is work intensive. Every messy church takes an awful lot of thinking, preparation goes into it. But most of that work people enjoy as well.
Wow. Okay. So Johanna, listening to that, what are your thoughts? What comes back to me is again that it's really getting everybody to do something. Everybody has a responsibility. Everybody, they're not sitting back, and they're not, okay, now stand and now sing or now go kneel. It's something more. They're kind of taking on this sacramental duty themselves.
Right. I think that comes back to that core value of hospitality, and what does it mean to kind of create a welcoming space where everyone has something to contribute. And that's always the challenge with all ages being together, right? The idea that sometimes I think we want kids present, but almost in that seen but not heard yet kind of thing, where Messy Church says, no, really, everybody has something to contribute to the conversation. And because we are using so many, kind of creative ways to explore faith, everybody really can kind of contribute. And so that's that, leaning into that hospitality value is really important.
Fantastic. So we are out of time. Jay, I'd like to ask you final thought. What do you wish those who are on a journey towards spirituality?
What would I wish for them? I would wish for them to become more deeply in touch with their own true selves, with the person of Jesus of Nazareth. And once they're doing that, then what we discover is that we find fulfillment not in self-centeredness, but rather in self-giving.
Wow. Okay. Let's see how we can stay in touch with the Reverend Jay MacLeod. Here is his parish, standrewsnl.org. And people can reach out to you by phone or email. Is that right, Jay, if they have any questions?
Sure.
Fantastic. And now let's go on to Messy Church. So it is messychurchusa.org. Under contact, I'm wondering, can people reach out to you, Johanna, if they have questions?
Yes, absolutely. They can use that the form right there, or our email addresses are there. So we'd love to chat about making Messy Church a reality and in your community.
Fantastic. So feel free to reach out to Reverend Jay MacLeod or to Johanna Myers about Messy Church, about the any questions you may have. There to answer your questions, hear your comments. Thank you so very much to the Reverend Jay MacLeod and to Associate Director of Messy Church USA, Johanna Myers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
So let's see what's coming up next week on Vienna Live. We have Catherine Mansfield Centenary. Catherine Mansfield traveled alone from her homeland, Wellington, New Zealand, to London in 1908 at the young age of 19, determined to become a writer. Having been schooled there for 3 years from 1903 to 1906, she had fallen in love with the great imperial metropolis. Always rebellious, even as a child, she soon found that the freedom she had craved in London, compared to the narrowness of Wellington society, brought its own issues, including pregnancy, abortion, drug dependency, and more. However, once she had met her future husband, John Middleton Murray, in 1912, her life became more settled, and she and Murray were soon very much part of literary London in the 1910s and 1920s, up until Mansfield's untimely death in 1923 at the age of 34. Her genius as a short story writer has never been in question, and today she is widely recognized as one of the main innovators of the modernist short story. Come welcome to our show, Sherry Grant, Artistic Director of the International Catherine Mansfield 100 New Zealand Festival patron Dr. Jerry Kimber, and cellist Martin Griffith, for a detailed exploration of the life and work of this iconic writer. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simimora.com. Again, that is Catherine Mansfield Centenary. And it is in 2 weeks on September 6th. So next Wednesday, we have no show. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Once again, thank you so very much to the Reverend Jay MacLeod and to Johanna Myers. Thank you to Victoria and Frederick Mulligan and Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet for their support of this show. Also to Mary Schlesinger for the lovely Viennese library you see behind me. Thanks most of all to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile from New London, New Hampshire, and Greenville, South Carolina. Goodbye, and see you in Wednesday in 2 weeks.